will get right into it. I think we had a really good lead into this through Reshma's presentation. And thanks to the Arthan team for the words before this that kind of explain why we're doing this. And so what we want to spend a little bit of time today is talking about what we call here this great balancing act, and we'll get into that shortly. I think I'll actually begin where Reshma led, which is to talk about trying to do, the kind of work they're doing, some in small organizations, some in larger. The goals vary. These are just some of the things that we've heard over the past few days, weeks, and months, and probably years, that it ranges from something as fundamental as I want to make a difference. It goes to I want to improve my program, I want to build a team, and it also gets quite personal at times, which is I just want to feel less stressed about my work, and I want this thing to work well without taking so much out of me, and other things like raising funds and so on. So irrespective of goals, irrespective of the kind of organization that you're at, or the role that you fulfill. And I want to emphasize this point that was mentioned earlier, which is that we don't believe that any of this strategy or any of these other things applies only to the leaders of organizations or founders or CEOs. It actually applies to everyone, and hopefully through this next segment, we can get into that a little bit more. So you have a goal, there's someone somewhere where you'd like to go, maybe you have many goals, let's just say that there's this thing that you're really looking to try to achieve. And the question that often comes up is how will I get there? The answer, I think all of us in this development sector have probably dealt with this in some form or the other, is that you need a strategy, right? And this picture often is what strategic planning can look like. When you think of, for those who have done this, when you think of theories of change and logic models, and people asking what your outcomes, what your multi-year goals, and in fact, I've asked these questions too, and I'm sure some of the folks listening in have heard these questions from me. And it's all very, yes, there is this goal waiting for you. And you can see in this picture, it resembles this road, that you're on this road, you have a very clear idea of this, there's my goal waiting for me, call it a goal, call it impact, it's right there waiting for me. And what we often also see though, as things go on, and there's no better example as right now, is that maybe sometimes this is what reality looks like. And it's not to say that it always is, but very often it's not that smooth road. It's not that linear logic model that says, I shall do these activities this quarter, and then these great things will happen next quarter or next year, and this is the impact I will create in 10 years' time. It's often a lot more vague than that. And there's no better example as the one of right now, which is that you're in a situation where, yes, you're on a path, but that path seems to be going up a mountain, and we're in a position now of having to climb a very large mountain. It's a winding road. It's headed in some direction. It's not always clear whether it's heading directly to that long-term goal that you have in mind. And this is where it's a really good point to tie it back to what Reshma mentioned earlier, that importance of having a compass and not just a map. Because too often in our experience, we've seen plans and ideas and strategies that look like the picture on the left, whereas very often the reality does look a bit more like on the right. And the other aspect to that is that it also depends a little bit on where you are as an organization and as a team. Because you may well have begun with the picture on the left when you were just starting to do some work, or a new program was launched, or had just started working with a new community. And there are a few things that can be put in. It's a little bit more predictable. Some of this can be foreseen. But as your work gets more complex, as you do things that are more meaningful, and potentially as your own ambition grows and you want to do more, or think you can do more work with that same community, the picture starts more and more resembling the one on the right. So the one thing that I wanted to mention here is to not think of strategy as being this very defined thing that gives you a very clear idea of getting from point A to point B. but acknowledging that it often looks like the picture on the right, and that is okay. That there are many people, there are many teams, many organizations and communities that have figured that out. And again, it was such a great lead-in from the keynote. And the things that matter there really are that aspect of what is the true north. I may not be able to exactly see that, yes, I'm going to get there in 6 months. And in the 7th month, I will be able to say this has been achieved or not. But I am headed in the right direction. And as a group, as a group of people in my organization, that's where we're headed. So this was kind of the first thing I wanted to bring out, which is the difference between strategic planning and reality at times, and the importance of just recognizing where you are as an organization. The second piece that I wanted to talk about is this aspect of who will get you there. So you've thought about it, there's somewhere you want to get, and you're headed there. And again, it doesn't depend on size of organization, doesn't depend on your designation or what you do. Very often, I would say more often than not, there's a group of people headed over there. And now you can define what this group means. It could be your team within your organization. It could be the communities with which you work, your partners. But there's a group of people that you're on this journey with. You want to get somewhere, you're going along with them. And very often that's what the team ends up looking, where it started with a few people doing something, add a few more people into it. There's a few people sitting on the roof of that auto rickshaw, but that's okay because it's clearly moving. You're headed in the right direction. People look pretty happy. It's very close knit. I guess there's not much of an option, but they're all very tightly knit over there and headed somewhere. And the question to ask is why do people in that group, or think about the teams that you work with, why sometimes are they looking so happy as they look to the future? And the answer is sometimes it's because this is what the strategy lays out. This is the story that we often tell ourselves to start with. We tell our colleagues, we definitely tell our funders, and sometimes the communities with which we work, that we have this figured out. We know how we're going to get there, and there's balance, right? That's what the scale at the bottom indicates. Gets more complex, gets more important, is that you're faced with this. And the very real question here is that, would you really trust an auto rickshaw to climb a mountain? And given the mountain, we were joking within the team the other day that it feels a little bit like this is what turnover looks like. That is literally people falling off the rickshaw as it's going up the mountain. And that's what an organization culture that's not well defined, that hasn't been put in place properly, can actually be like. Turnover, people saying that this is too difficult, this is not what I signed up for, and they get replaced with other people, and the rickshaw continues up the mountain. So what does this mean, right? So what does it mean in terms of there's this team or this culture that we're trying to build? What that often means is it translates into a few different things. One of the really nice definitions that I've heard of culture, I like it a lot, is this one that says that culture is pretty much the way things are done around here, right? So sometimes you don't need to be able to write 20 lines on a culture. It's very well understood by anyone that works with that group of people that this is their culture. And that can mean many things. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. It comes down to who takes decisions. Is decision-making spread out or very centralized? Is there a second or third line of management at this organization? Do they work with partners well? Do they work with communities? Is it very top-down? Is it very consensus-based? Are they looking at it in terms of, say, delivering a service to a community, or are they in it to work as a part of a community going forward? So the answers vary. The answers vary entirely depending on the work that you're doing, entirely on the kind of people that you work with. But they're very important questions to ask. And the really important point over here is that these things have to match. That it's very understandable that the picture on the left is an organization that is early in its journey. It's a new organization or doing different work. It is bound to look like that. It's all very different, and you kind of have to do it like that. But as the work goes and gets more complicated, this situation, an auto rickshaw climbing a mountain, is unbalanced. And that's what the scale at the bottom indicates. And sometimes what you really need when you're going up that mountain is something a lot more. And this is that aspect of investing in culture. Another question that we get very often is, what does that even mean? What does it mean to invest in a culture? And the answer that we've often given people is that it again really depends on what you're doing. So if the work that you're doing is like climbing mountains, please invest in a vehicle that's more solid. Please invest in decision making that's not centralized with one people. If you have hundreds of people doing work with the organization, think about who are the kinds of people that you would like to be part of this team. And it covers aspects such as, who do we hire, who do we promote, what does it mean for us that someone has done very well or has done a really great job, and how do we communicate with people. Again, it's not to say that one way of working is necessarily better than another, that a flat organization is always necessarily better than one that is a little more structured. It's none of that. But a really important point that we want to get across today is the fact that these things need to match. That if your strategy looks like it's relatively simple, it is the straight road, it's quite predictable, then by all means drive an auto rickshaw or a scooter or a cycle, and that's perfectly fine. If you're going to be doing the more complex work, and we've seen this with organization after organization, that thinks about culture as an afterthought, that we're on a straight road, it's all going really great. You come to the mountain, and then halfway up the mountain is when a few people fall off the auto rickshaw, and then you say, maybe we should get a bus now. It's kind of late in the day to be having realizations like that. So this is kind of that second point, which is the balance. Make sure that your team and strategy are balanced, whether it looks like this or the previous picture that I showed. The third question that I wanted to put at the beginning of this is this very fundamental question about, is this what you should be doing? Again, Reshma's keynote gave a lot of really great points that tie in very well with this, because the questions that came up were around, what is my true north? What are the choices that I can make? What are the assets that I need to develop? All really important. But I would also, or a 500-person organization, you could be doing policy work or what is that alignment within this group? How sure are you? How clear are these things to you? Your vision, your values, your identity. And what I will say over here, and we have or a volunteer, whatever, but if that doesn't really work, right, that this is what I really think I should be doing with my time, with my life, and if enough people within that group don't agree on these things and feel that, yeah, this actually matters, what this leads to very often is actually, in some ways, it looks like self-sabotage, in that it was all looking great, but it's not really working out, and we really feel we should be doing something else. So with that bit of it, we can stop on that particular point here. We will come back to this and many more things. But I just would like you to keep this in mind. And for those on the call, it would be really great if you could take a piece of paper and just draw this out over there, right? So just take a piece of paper, make some lines on it, write these words out, and just think of your work and what you're doing, right? What your goal is, where we started, in a line, right? Just literally one line on each of these. No need for a lot of detail right now, because detail will take a lot of time. But in a line, what's the strategy, right? How are we going to get there? What's the kind of team or culture that we're creating? And then under that, what do those things mean to me? Vision, values, identity. So if you could just take a minute, take a piece of paper, and just scribble out a little bit of this for a minute, that would be much appreciated. So I'll just leave this on for a few seconds while you just draw the lines on paper. And while you think about that, and while you put down those lines, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest speakers for today. We're very lucky to have Avani and Srini join us. and I will introduce them in this way. So I'll start with Avani. So Avani is a fellow at the Center for Policy Research, CPR. She's the director of the Accountability Initiative at CPR. And the focus of her work has been in building evidence for policy advocacy, particularly to strengthen transparency and accountability in public financial management for service delivery. Her most recent research understands the implications of the 14th Finance Commission on social sector spending. And as a part of her work, she is leading research studies on health, sanitation, nutrition, and education financing. Avani has also been anchoring the publication of the annual budget brief series, which I think a lot of people on this call might have seen coming out of Accountability Initiative at CPR. And also implementing fund tracking surveys on key social sector schemes. Prior to Accountability Initiative, Avani worked at the Center for Development and Human Rights with Dr. Arjun Sengupta. She has a MSc in Development Studies from the London School of Economics and a BA cum laude from Smith College in Massachusetts in the US. I'll like to now introduce Srinivas Krishnaswamy, who heads is the CEO of Vasudha Foundation. Srini is an economist by training. He has over a decade of working on issues of economic reform, sustainable development, and the environment. He set up Vasudha Foundation in 2010 with the aim of promoting environment-friendly, socially just, and sustainable models of development. Vasudha Foundation is currently working on a wide range of projects around renewable energy, energy efficiency, and policy-related campaigns. Vasudha lobbies at the national and international level while promoting green and alternative technologies at the grassroots level. Since 2010, Srini has helped steer Vasudha Foundation in implementing a wide range of projects. Some of these include facilitating a few states in India in the preparation of their state climate action plans, preparing a detailed institutional strengthening plan for a nodal agency that's implementing the state climate action plan of Madhya Pradesh, which has been accepted by the Madhya Pradesh government and is being implemented. So Avani and Srini, thank you both very much for being here and taking the time to join us to talk about strategy, culture, and all of this. I would request you to come on, to turn on your video now. Okay, great. So thanks, Avani. I think Srini, when you get a chance, if you could come on, that would be great too. And so I would just... Sure, no worries. We'll go on, and then we can carry on with it. All right. So I think Srini, I'll actually put the first question to you, if that is okay, which is just around. You heard the keynote earlier today. You heard some of this. Tell us a little bit about Vasudha, what you do, and what have these things meant to you, building a strategy and team as you have proceeded.
Thanks so much, Arjav, and good afternoon, all of you. Let me sort of step back, introduce Vasudha Foundation, and take you through the journey of Vasudha Foundation. As Arjav said, Vasudha Foundation works in the clean energy climate policy space. And when we started off, our first sort of work was more on energy access, and from energy access leading to the clean energy sort of a work. While legally we were set up in 2010, I would say that we sort of evolved as a trust, as an NGO, only around NGO as a trust. But then our mode of operation was more like a consulting think tank. And what we thought initially between in the periods of 2010 and 2014 is that we would go from projects to projects. Now, no matter the projects that we took then between 2010 and 2014 were had a passion behind it, were very focused on clean energy, climate policy, and that kind of work. But it was more going from project to project. In 2014, we thought we should re-strategize. Is that where we want to do? Is that where we want to go? Do we really want to go from project to project? Or do we really want to define a goal for ourselves? Yes, when we started Vasudha Foundation, we did have a goal. We did have an ambition. But then, and a lot of the projects that we took from 2010 to 2014 were more or less aligned to that goal, but we were still going from project to project. So it was in 2014 that we decided, okay, let's define a goal for ourselves and let's see where we want to go from there, rather than go from a project to project. But then all the projects or whatever work we do would sort of lead towards achieving that kind of the goal that we set for ourselves. So 2014, that was a time when there was a lot of this talk on climate. That was just before the Paris. What we set for ourselves is that, okay, if we need to achieve 1.5, keep temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, that is address climate change, what are the various areas that we need to work on? Now, again, within our expertise was mainly on energy access, climate policy, and clean energy. That's where we started developing projects that would work towards achieving that goal. So that's where we started off. Between 2010 and 2014, we were a very small team. Like I said, we were just about, it was anywhere between a 1 and a 3 member organization. And from 2014, once we identified a goal and we realized that these are the various things that we need to do towards achieving that goal, we grew from strength to strength. And I must say that in this 5-6 years, we have grown from a 3-member organization to close to a 30-member organization as on date. So that's primarily just to set the context. Arjav?
Great, thanks, Srini. And can you tell us a little bit about the decision making? So you mentioned 2010 to 14, project to project, small team. You talked about what you did 2014 onwards. So it sounds very smooth and easy, but was it? Like what?
Yeah, so in terms of decision making, yes. And between 10 and 14 side, it was more like a one-man kind of a show. 2014-15 onwards, we started building a team. Like I said, we grew from virtually 3 to a 14-member team, and that's when decisions were more sort of collective. We had more people involved in taking decisions, and even in sort of defining a goal for ourselves, or in identifying what are the various projects. It would be a team sort of an effort that would go into identifying the kind of work that we would do, the kind of projects that we would implement, and also in terms of defining a roadmap for all of these projects that lead to the overarching goal.
All right, great. Thanks, Srini. And we will come back and speak some more specifically. But Avani, I'd like to bring you in at this point. And it's a similar question to you. As you think, and you've been at Accountability Initiative from the beginning, you've seen and that organization. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Sure, Arjav. Thank you so much. So, am I audible? Yes. Okay, great. So, just to clarify though, unlike Vasudha, we aren't an organization in the legal sense of the word. We are a research group within the Center for Policy Research. And the reason I'm clarifying that is that it also has its own complications because of that. A little bit about us, I think. So we were founded in 2008 within CPR. And most of our work has been focusing on understanding state capacity, tracking implementation of a lot of government social sector schemes, and also working on the citizen side to make sure that citizens know how to navigate the landscape. And finally, the way that we define our vision in some ways is responsive governance. While I'm able to now say it in 2 words, of course, that wasn't always the case. So the way that AI is kind of structured, it's almost like imagine a university which has different departments. So while we're all obviously governed by the UGC, so in this case, Center for Policy Research, each department to some degree has its own identity. Each department, or in this case, every initiative within CPR, to some degree has a structured. I think people came to complain or vent about the boss. So I had to play this tricky role of listening and choosing what to tell the boss and how to say it without breaking their confidence, but also obviously not pissing off the boss. So kind of playing that mediator role, as it were. I have to admit, it wasn't a fun task. So of course, you got to hear a lot about different things that now I don't get to hear about. But anyway, I remember we had an HR consultant who was, and we were starting to have these conversations a little bit about identity, loyalty, culture. And I was asked this very simple question saying, where does your loyalty lie? Does it lie with the organization or does it lie with the people? And it was partly in response to me refusing to disclose who said what, but still like kind of trying to play this tactful role. And I remember at that time I answered very, very proudly, and I was like very, very impressed with my, I guess, presence of mind to be able to say this very forcefully, saying that obviously it's the people, because people make up the organization. There is no organization without people. And I strongly believe that more than like processes or systems or even this hierarchy, and it was actually just the team and the people. Part of it, of course, came from the fact that we were a small group. So as Srini also was saying, that time, now we're 30, that time we were much smaller. We were all kind of the same age. And so that also brought itself, I saw in your poll question also, you had this we are family kind of feeling. And at AI, we almost had this feeling that, like that Hotel California feel, right? Like where you can't ever really leave. And even now, a lot of the people who were there then are still some of my closest friends now. But I think while I wasn't wrong in my thinking, I think things did change. And it comes, as you said, as you grow bigger, as age differences increase, but more importantly, as we as a group of people became more ambitious, as our strategy evolved, as we realized that the same things that worked then didn't work anymore. We realized that we had to almost make a conscious effort now to build culture, to systemize processes, all of which, what you were talking about, that balancing act to some degree. Initially, I think we were focusing so much on that team, on the auto rickshaw with a lot of people, and though that auto rickshaw was not as crowded, it was much smaller. And suddenly now we had to start asking ourselves these questions that you said, is this the right team for this strategy? How do you move there? And suddenly build in a lot more systems and processes. So that was a little bit about our journey.
Thank you so much, Avani. That was really great to hear. And Srini, to come to something that you mentioned while speaking, but also that Avani just touched upon. When you look at this journey and the team that you've built along the way, you talked about decision making, and you said that it's more done as a group now more so than before. Tell us a little bit about what's that experience been like, building that team as Vasudha has been growing and these changes have been coming in.
Well, interestingly, it's been a very mixed sort of an experience. At some point of time, when we were a small team, it was like I could do everything and I love doing everything and so on and so forth. And now it seems like as if I'm not able to do as much as I would want to do, in that sense that everyone does it together. So that's sort of one experience. But on the other hand, what we realize is that we are able to move faster. We are a lot more nimble now. There is, there are multiple views that come in, and then and it's not just one set of views that are being implemented. So everyone, contributes to developing a program in that sense, and even the outputs. For instance, some of the recent work that we have done, especially on the Power Sector Outlook series. I just want to single out one. Has been very, very interesting with everyone sitting together, bouncing ideas, and then taking it on board or debating ideas and developing this whole thing together. And that itself has been a different experience. And I think it has, in terms of our output, it has made a big difference. It has made a big difference. I think this collective sort of a thing has made a big difference in that sense. So I wouldn't say that when we were small, our output was bad, but now I think we are able to bring in multiple perspectives and are also a lot more, what should I say, bringing in more ideas to the table than what used to happen when we were small.
All right, great. Thanks for that, Srini. Avani, I'd like to come back to you for a moment and to bring in something that you talked about, that whole aspect of why you do this work. And you've obviously spoken before, and you've spoken about that whole thing of. So can you talk a little bit about that? In the morning, not morning. During the keynote, Reshma referred to it as the true north. And what is your true north?
That's a tough question, Arjav, because I think one of the questions I in fact had almost, I really liked Reshma's keynote, and I think that compass analogy was really useful. But I also saw in some of the questions is that you also need a map, right? Sometimes so one may have a strategy, but at the same time, so one may have like an eventual outcome or vision that you want to get there. That could be your core and true north. But then at the same time, you also need to have a map that possibly can help you. If not this one route, then maybe you need to pick another route. So you may still be going north, but there may be different routes to reach the destination. I think we keep asking ourselves this question, and I think one of the things that was interesting even from the poll results is that while the core should be strong, so the eventual destination should be strong, I think what we have also learned to some degree is not only do the strategies evolve, but we also have to sometimes be dynamic. So I think we spend a lot of time discussing this as well, and I think one of the things, so we were always very true to the fact that we believed in a system where governments are transparent and accountable to citizens, but at the same time, citizens also understand their rights and needs and can actually engage with the government, right? And that was that one-liner that we always kept coming back to. And now we've been able to define it a little bit more by saying we believe in responsive governance that is responsive to itself, to its citizens. But as I think we're constantly having to still ask ourselves about what are the different elements that can even get you to responsive governance. And that's where I think there is that evolving nature. I remember during our sessions with Arjav and his team, you gave us this great analogy of the cheetah and elephant. And that's something we're now constantly asking ourselves. If for those of you who, in case someone doesn't know, it's similar, I think, to almost a Thinking Fast and Slow book, right? Like the System 1 and System 2. So the cheetah is fast, it's agile, it can change directions really quickly. The elephant can possibly, it may actually have a lot more impact, but it is slow, it is steady, it moves in usually like one direction, and isn't as easy to move its track. And I think one of the things that these days during COVID times is something that one keeps asking ourselves. How do you keep your integrity and core strong, but at the same time continue to be agile, continue to be responsive, and continue to innovate? So what was really interesting about today's, so most of the audience today is that innovation was something that came up very strongly across most of the people. And that's something that has been a bit of a challenge for us. Because there is a danger sometimes that in your agility and wanting to be responsive, that you forget your core. And so even within that, how do you find that right balancing act? In one of the previous tracks of Arthan, I think Pradeep from Ford also had a slightly provocative analogy, but I think it really hit hard, which is that if you're running a dog shelter, for instance, doesn't mean that you necessarily have the skills to run a children's home. So you shouldn't pivot, which is now the latest buzzword during COVID times, but you shouldn't pivot completely forgetting your core. But at the same time, it's equally important to be able to be responsive. It's equally important to regularly ask yourself, am I actually doing the right things, or is my strategy working to achieve what I want to achieve? Should I be doing more? Should I be doing less? And how can I actually get there? So I think that is that's something that is, I won't say we have the answer, and you're the ones who are teaching us the masterclass. But it is something that I think it's important to keep asking yourself. And I don't think that you have to pick one completely. So I think for some things you should be an elephant. For some things you need to be a cheetah, especially in these days, keeping in mind the funding landscape, keeping in mind the COVID landscape, keeping in mind just the way that the world is moving so much faster now.
And thanks for that, Avani. A follow-up question for you then is that, so as you explained, there are these choices to make. Do I move fast? Do I move slow? In this direction? What kind of work? And it's one thing to think about it as an individual, and another to think about it as a team, and do it as a team. What's that been like? Not only thinking, but then also bringing alignment on, because potentially not everyone agrees with the direction or the kind of work, or so how have you worked with that?
So one of the interesting parts, and it's funny, like it's like, I guess, typical human behavior, that it's very easy to study something that is external, but harder to look within. So I was thinking the other day that, like, we do a lot of work on studying culture of frontline functionaries, right? So the government's own organizational culture. So we talk about motives, we talk about incentives, we talk about attitude, skills. So all of these aspects that come in, and we actually like make a conscious effort to study them. And we found a lot of examples of frontline functionaries saying that they feel disempowered, they feel like post office messengers because they're not given decision making authority. They don't feel like they have any independence or rights. And I think partly subconsciously, maybe having studied this now, I think we were from the beginning trying to make a conscious step to actually make it pretty decentralized in terms of the decision making. It does have its set of challenges, like any decentralized system does. And again, we have to keep coming back to, should everything be decentralized, right? And the reason I'm saying that is, it ties in with what you just said, is that how easy or difficult has that been? What does it mean to get everyone on board? If one person isn't on board, does that mean that you drop the idea? You drop the person? I think neither. You have to find that kind of balance of how do you coexist and listen to their, and one of us has to take that leap of faith to some degree, saying trust the rest of us, or that we will try and see, or we will keep your concerns in mind. It's not been, I won't say it's been easy. I think we're still working on it. And I think what has been a revelation to some degree, and I remember, Arjav, in one of our sessions, you had said that culture takes a long time to build, and we were all a bit struck by that, saying, oh my God, this is going to be ages. But I think what's even more scary is that you could build a culture that really works for you, but then suddenly people change, the circumstances change, and the culture doesn't work anymore, right? Which is, so you have to also keep evolving to it. So right now we're in this balance where we do give a lot, we do believe a lot in autonomy, we do believe a lot in collective decision making, but now we've kind of come to this place where there are some things that we've said, okay, these are things that will be centralized, and they need to be centralized, and not everyone can weigh in on every single decision.
Thank you for that, Avani. And Srini, over to you. Very interested in learning two things from you. Maybe we'll just start from the first, which again is this question on this true north, because the kind of work that you do, the number of different people that you work with, other organizations, government, and we know that you work with this really large network of people in India, outside India. There seems to be so many things that Vasudha Foundation could do And I do have this question about what does that mean for you? This true north, this is what we will do. This is our identity. How have you come to that?
Uh, so, uh, so in terms of our position, like I said, so we have a goal. So we have defined the goal that we would work towards addressing climate change and keeping temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's the overarching goal for us, and most of our programs are aiming at that. Now, where we have sort of developed a niche for ourselves, and that's where, and the team is very happy working on some of those aspects, is to work on certain areas that that a lot of other civil society groups are a little nervous to work on them. For example, the whole idea of carbon neutrality, or the whole issue of do we say no to coal kind of issue, is something that we are happy to take on, but at the same time factoring in the local circumstances. Now, there are some of these issues that many organizations are not very comfortable looking at. But then for us, so that's where we sort of develop a niche as to on more of a sort of an identity, as these are the groups that can work on some of these issues, including, for instance, and one area that we've sort of gained a lot of reputation amongst civil society groups, both within the country and outside, is our ability to actually mine data and make data accessible to people. So that's been one area that we have sort of developed a very strong expertise on. And the other area that we also have developed a very strong sort of expertise and is in this collective working, or what we call as a network development. So a lot of our projects are actually are not just independent projects of Vasudha Foundation, but we have set up platforms. To give you an example, the greenhouse gas platform, India platform, was the first such initiative that we worked, and that has been recognized even by the government of India as a very unique initiative, never done before kind of a thing. A very unique CSO platform, set up to look at greenhouse gas emissions in India. Similarly, we are setting up another network, or we have set up another network to bring in voices from the ground. So some of these, so our belief is that, if you want to make a change, you cannot necessarily do it alone, and you need to bring in different expertise and bring in different voices to do it. And that's one area that we've sort of developed and are known to set up these kind of networks, or have been good at setting up these kind of networks. It's not that we do not work independently. We also work independently, but we also believe that collective actions will have a lot more impact, especially with the government or outside, and that's an area that we have sort of created a niche for ourselves.
Okay. Thanks for that, Srini. And how do you say no to things? How do you say no to work? That we won't do this, and who decides that?
So, so far, I mean, I don't think we have reached a situation where we had to say no to work in that sense. We do know, and we have developed teams, or we have dedicated teams to work on the three verticals that we're looking at. One is the whole, or I would say two large verticals. One is the entire power sector, which includes clean energy, power sector, energy access, and so on. And the other vertical will be the climate vertical. And then, of course, the communications, the GIS, and so on and so forth, which will be cross-cutting, supporting all both the verticals. So within this, we are sort of very clear on where we want to go. And a lot of these work evolves. While we're doing one, we realize that, this is where we are, and from these are the kind of work that can come from. And that's how we approach funders with these ideas. And very often, philanthropy organizations themselves feel that these are areas that they would like to work, and it sort of fits into our sort of scheme of things. So right now, we have not reached a stage, or we have not been in a stage where we say no. we are still that way small, and I think we can take a lot more even now. So we've not reached a stage where we can say no to things. Yes, on certain aspects where we would have to say no, for example, is that we wouldn't do a campaign on let's say a no coal campaign kind of a thing. That's something that, but nobody has approached us to do something like that. So that situation has not arose so far.
All right. Thank you. So we're also getting questions coming in. So I'll put a couple of these to folks here. So I'll mention the question. Either of you are welcome to jump in and answer it. And folks, please continue to send in questions. It's really good to see that. So one question that comes in is around this whole thing of, there's this true north and there's a compass, but then there's also this map. And what I want to just modify that question slightly is who makes the map in your organizations? Who does that? Is it you? Are you the ones holding the compass and others make the map for you, or how does that work?
Srini, do you want to go first?
Well, I don't mind. I mean, in our case, it's a difficult question. In some cases, couple of us make the map. In some cases, it's a team which makes the map. I think it sort of varies, if I got your question right.
So I would say that I think it is a mixture of both. We do have within the Accountability Initiative a senior leadership team that kind of tried to create a map. I won't say that we've made a complete map, and then we do share it with everyone in the teams to make sure that we get everyone's buy-in, but also get inputs. Because I think one of the most fascinating parts is that sometimes our younger colleagues have a completely different way of looking at a map. So maybe we're looking at it this way, but you should actually be looking at it sideways, and we had not thought of that. I'm reminded of this book, which is a great book called Building State Capability. And like I said, I think I still have my researcher hat, and we're so used to studying the state and looking at state capacity. But a lot of it is actually true, because a lot of it is about organizations and how they are structured and how they are, what the culture is. And one of the examples there was that so like in 2020, and I'm tweaking the example. It was an America-specific example. I'm converting it into an India-specific example. So say in 2020, you need to, okay, let's make it 2019, since now it's all complicated. But in 2019, you need to go from, say, Delhi to Bombay. It's quite easy to get a map, right? Like we have technology. You can Google the distance. You can find out every single almost like pit stop. You can draw out your entire journey in some ways. And in that process, what is good is that you kind of have a sense of what you need to get there. And again, I'm tying back to your analogy, Arthan, which is Arjav, which is that the team and the strategy balancing act. So you kind of, that if I'm driving, I need a car, I need people that have driving licenses. Now I probably need my phone with my GPS. I need whatever, water, snacks, etc. Battery, external battery. But imagine in 1804, there were no maps. And you had that mountain road. Imagine there's no even road, clearly defined road. You could go on a road that someone else has created, but what if you want to create your own path? How do you start begin that process of creating that map? And through that entire story, which I'm now summarizing very quickly, I think what was interesting was that in some ways you need people to kind of help create that map for you, right? Because you're drawing that map as you're going along. So the first thing you need is a person who can actually draw the map. You also need someone who can possibly make the road. And so within your team, you're kind of getting people that you trust, and you also have to give them something that, why should they join you in this risky journey that you are taking? And so together collectively you start making that map. I think once you've made that map, then it's a little easier because, of course, there will be boulders and landslides that come in the way, and you need to maybe change your direction. But you have at least a inkling of how to get there. I think the only thing that I'd add, though, that while I think that map should be to some degree a collective exercise, because until people kind of believe in don't if until people don't believe in the strategy, which is almost a journey, it would be hard to actually reach the destination. Otherwise, you have imagine like you're in a car and everyone's like, "Nee, you have to go right, you have to go left." Like no one's really like following the directions. But at the same time, it's also important to again thinking of a winding road, be adaptable because in that map there may be external factors that play a role as well. And so I think a very long-winded answer, but but basically I think we do make it ourselves, but we are conscious of recognizing that we may need to change it along the way, and trying to get more people hopefully on board about how to get there.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Avani. Thank you very much. Yeah, so on that note, would also put that question then as a follow-up to Srini in that sense. As in, so one of the questions that's common is that how do you get buy-in to the plan or strategy, right? Because as was said, sometimes it's developed together, sometimes it's not necessarily everyone holding the steering wheel of this car or making the map or any of that. What do you do, Srini, to get buy-in to these things once they evolve or come up?
Yes. So very often, some of these decisions do end up a little top down because.
Sorry, I think we've lost Srini. So we will get an answer to that question and hopefully circulate it after. What I will do now is basically thank both our speakers. So Avani and Srini, if you could go off video for a bit, but please do stick around in case more questions come in, and please feel free to ask your own. But this would be a good point. Thank you both so much for sharing and being so free with sharing your experiences, your thoughts, the questions in your minds, and being very open and honest with all of that. So thank you very much. And it's a very, I think, nice segue. Let me just go back to sharing my screen. Which is to kind of come back to where we began this discussion and around this question, which we were at, right? So this was one of the questions that I asked at the start, is this what you should be doing? And we heard some really great perspectives, and thanks again for the people who put in questions on that, and I've been following this so intently. But this whole aspect of, yes, there's a team, there's a strategy, and it sits on top of this bedrock, to use that word, of these things, of vision, of values, of identity. And one of the things that we have often seen, and I brought this up earlier, is this thing that the other stuff is important, but what really matters, and you heard some really good examples from Avani and Srini, what really matters is that core of, look, this is what we think we should be doing. This is what, right? Opportunities are coming in. Organizations that have been doing a certain kind of work are being asked, that's really great, but why don't you do this instead right now in order to survive? And that's all obviously really important, and for the community, for the organization. But it comes back to this thing: what values are you honoring by doing this kind of work? And the last question on it, which tends to be for many people even far deeper, is who am I being when I do this? And being, in many senses, has two aspects. There's an internal aspect of what's my identity. So when I get up and look in the mirror, who am I being? And should that person be doing this work, right? So if I really see myself as being that person who stands up for certain things, that independence is critical to me and so on, I probably am not the best person who should be out there doing a community program that really depends on working very closely with people in government and other organizations who may not really agree entirely with what I do, and vice versa. And similarly, so the external aspect of being is reputation. How do other people see your work? So these are the questions that we've seen people grapple with. We think they're very important to answer. And especially at a time like this, I mean, at all times, but especially at a time like this, that clarity around who's being impacted by the work that we do. By changing track, are we changing that in any way? Is that okay? What values am I honoring by doing this work? And who am I being when I look in the mirror? The other aspect of this that tends to be really important is it's great and very important to answer these questions as individuals. It's also equally important to answer them as groups. And we heard examples, Avani and Srini both shared that thing of that sometimes these answers are different for different people. And as you're building this team, as you're trying to get these people together into this auto rickshaw or bus or headed up this hill or this mountain, these things matter a great deal, because the greater your alignment on these, the more what looks like maybe sometimes, and as times change, this can change too, but what looks like something that is vague, is changing, isn't very stable, isn't very aligned, isn't in harmony. The more clarity there is around this, the more it starts flattening out a little bit, which is the alignment. This is also one of the reasons why small teams work so well. There are all kinds of other reasons for it, but this is a big one. The small team, you've come together, you understand one another. There's alignment. There's alignment and understanding of vision, values, identity. And the challenge that we all face as we do more work, grow organizations, work with more people, work with different kinds of entities, funders, government, you name it, is exactly that. How do you flatten that and make it so that there is alignment, there is harmony, because what you're building on top of that is everything. You're building a strategy on top of that. You're building a team on top of that. You're building time, the one resource that you're not getting back. You're spending all that time doing this. And that's kind of that bedrock that should let you answer those next questions, which are, how am I going to get there? And who's going to get me there to my goal? So irrespective of whether you're in a small team, large team, individual, we're doing very complex work, that is very complicated strategy, or something that's really simple, the more you have a solid grounding to answer this, our strong belief is that the better off you will be. I'd like to come back to this for a moment for those who took out that piece of paper and drew this out and maybe wrote a sentence or a few sentences on this. This would be a great time to just go back to it for a moment and look at what you've put down and see if any of what you've heard today from all of us or any of the questions that you heard answered or any of that changes anything for you or lends to a little bit more clarity or sharpness around what this means. We completely understand that developing a strategy can often takes months. Developing a team or a team culture can take years. And as Avani said before, it's something that you have to keep doing as things change. And also the articulation of some of these things, values, identity. So going beyond, let's say, what's on the wall of your organization, saying, here are our core values. Really think of it and say, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for why I'm doing this work, the people I want to work with? And just to end this presentation, I'd like to point you to this resource that is on India Development Review, so idronline.org, or you can just search for this, is what it takes to be an abundant leader. And there are two questions that come through. You can see those on the screen, so I won't read them out. But it really cuts across a lot of our discussion today. It goes into what purpose is, what it means to lead, to work with people, the kinds of people you want to work with, the culture that you're trying to build. And all of that, as we've spoken about quite a bit, has a lot to do with the strategy that you pick. and kind of harmonizes and ties all of these things together. So with this, thank you all very much for being with us.